Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the 11th week of 2015. For almost 25 years, this program has been a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion of the news of the week and its coverage by the media, first on a so-called community radio station, and when censored and locked out of there, welcomed, I'm happy to say, by the good folks at Urbana Public Television. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight are David Green and David Johnson. Our program's name, News from Neptune, was chosen to honor Noam Chomsky, who's been talking sense about American politics for twice the quarter century we've been on the air. Chomsky has said that in the American media, either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true, and it will sound like it's from Neptune. This and previous editions of this program are archived on YouTube and posted to the Facebook page for News from Neptune, where you'll also find comments from viewers, articles we've referred to, and further comments from us. I also can be reached at carl@newsfromneptune.com, and I'm happy to receive your comments. Chomsky has remarked that the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum, even encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of debate. That seems to me to be what's going on in American politics today, with the lively debate provided by the Republican and Democrat parties. But what are the presuppositions of the system that are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of debate? It seems to me there are principally two: neoliberalism and neoconservatism. Neoliberalism is the conscious campaign by American business elites to reverse the democratizing trends in the American economy from the New Deal through the 1960s. Neoliberalism supports the limitation or abolition of social supports, which they call entitlements, like Social Security and Medicare, deregulation of business, including manufacture and finance, and promotion of the so-called private sector's role in society. Private sector means rich people, the 1%. It wants to limit democratic control. Neoliberalism wants to limit democratic control of economic activity and have government protect the role of corporations around the globe. They call that free trade and globalization. Neoconservatism advocates the assertive promotion of democracy and the American national interest in international affairs, principally by means of military force. But in this case, democracy means U.S. political control, and the American national interest means the worldwide economic interests of the American rich, the 1%. The playwright Tom Stoppard says, "War is capitalism with the gloves off." Of course, neoliberalism is capitalism with the gloves on, to pick your pocket. After a generation of intense political activity by the business elite in America, both Republican and Democratic parties are now neoliberal and neoconservative. The Democrats were thoroughly colonized beginning in the Carter administration, and the Republicans stopped being an ordinary political party altogether and became a radical insurgency who've abandoned any commitment to parliamentary democracy at all. Their goal for the last few years has simply been to undermine anything that Obama might do in an effort to regain power and serve their primary constituency, which is the very wealthy and corporate sector. They try to conceal this. You can't get votes that way, so they had to mobilize sectors of the population which have always been there, but have never been mobilized into an organized political force. Evangelical Christians, extreme nationalists, terrified people who have to carry guns into Starbucks because somebody might be after them, and so on and so forth. That's a big force. And inspiring fear is not very difficult in the United States. We have a long history back to colonial times as an extremely frightened society. And mobilizing people in fear of them, whoever them happens to be, from ISIS to black people in Missouri, from Russians to Iranians, It's an effective technique used over and over. And right now, the Republicans' non-policy has succeeded in putting them back in a position of at least congressional power. So their personal attack on Obama is simply part of that general effort. Meanwhile, Obama has attacked 8 countries from the air, more than Bush, and continues to conduct the most extreme terrorist campaign of modern times. He's killed thousands of people with drones, including hundreds of children, while he pretends that he's ending wars. What's the answer? We need to bring all the troops home and provide a good job at a living wage too, now that I think of it, at a living wage for every American who wants one. But that probably can't be done within the spectrum of acceptable opinion in the U.S. today. So you're watching News from Neptune, a passive and obedient edition, where our format is to take turns suggesting stories that have been ignored or misreported, sometimes, if not often, even innocently, in the corporate media, and then asking our colleagues to comment on them. And David Green has the first story.
Well, let me just follow up with what you've been saying to provoke, your response.
Okay.
What is going on? Obama is being presented as a kind of a peace president.
Yeah.
He wants to negotiate nuclear arms or nuclear agreement with Iran, and he doesn't want to provide arms to Ukraine to attack the rebel forces in East Ukraine. So he's being attacked, of course, as you say, from what is called the neoconservative, while pursuing these neoliberal policies, most recent of which is a huge deal between the IMF and the government of Ukraine that will further decapitate the infrastructure, the public infrastructure in that country. So is this collusion between forces that pretend to be opposed to each other?
Yes, I think that's exactly what it is. And I think we should be very careful. Obama has probably been better than any recent president about saying one thing and doing the other. The delicate word is lie. But Obama lies about his policy better than any president because his job is to misrepresent those policies to the American public because they know that if they were represented directly, the American public would reject them. And take the 2 examples that you mentioned, Ukraine and Iran. In fact, while Obama pretends to be hesitating on providing arms for the neo-fascist government in Kiev. In fact, they're sending American troops. There are several National Guard units in eastern Ukraine, in the Kiev, working for the Kiev government right now. They're trainers, you see. I mean, God, it takes me back. I remember a cartoon that was posted on a college dormitory when I was a freshman, on a college, on the door to a dorm room when I was a freshman. A cartoon from Vietnam before the Tonkin Gulf incident where the president is saying, we have to be very careful. The Russian volunteers are getting very close to the American trainers in Vietnam. Well, in fact, Vietnam had been invaded, South Vietnam had been invaded in the Kennedy administration, and there were American troops throughout the region, as well as American bombers. And the notion that the U.S. was not invading South Vietnam was a lie of the Kennedy and early Johnson administration. That's exactly parallel to what the Obama administration is saying about Ukraine. The Obama administration engineered the coup in Ukraine and encouraged the Kiev government to attack the eastern regions that didn't want to accept the coup. The long-term concern for this is to do something that will damage Russian control of Eurasia. This has been about as explicit as can be in Democratic Party political planning going back years. Now, what they're actually doing what the Obama administration is actually doing in regard to Ukraine right now is to provide those weapons one way or another, indirectly perhaps through Poland or some other groups, directly in fact, and simply lie about it. There are several possibilities here. But the notion that Obama is standing against arming Ukraine and increasing the killing in Donbass, the eastern region of Ukraine, is simply false. It's not what they're doing. Take the Iran example too. That is, the notion that Obama is standing for peace with Iran, and we've got these crazy Republicans and others in the Congress who are pushing for war with Iran is partially true. There are those crazy people in the Congress pushing for war with Iran. But what the Obama administration is doing, once again, is not exactly what it appears to be doing. What the Obama administration is doing is trying to restore the status quo ante that existed in the Middle East before the 1979 Iranian Revolution. In those days, America controlled the flows of Middle East energy, from flows of Middle East oil, by means of a tripod, the three legs of which were Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Iran. Well, what happened with the 79 revolution in Iran is that that tripod lost one of its legs, and that the U.S. has been trying to restore that for a long time. The U.S. doesn't care a fig about nuclear weapons in Iran. I'm not even sure the Israelis do either, because the possibilities are so small. I mean, if the Iranians were ever to actually produce a nuclear weapon, it would be solely as a deterrent. The notion that they could use that to stop the hundreds of nuclear weapons that Israel has and the thousands of nuclear weapons the U.S. has, because the price of using those weapons would go up. The danger that an attack on Iran would produce one nuclear weapon in Israel, one nuclear strike in Israel, would be enough to deter, it's thought, the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran. They're not concerned, the U.S. isn't concerned about Iran getting one nuclear weapon. It is very much concerned about Iran getting in bed with Russia and China through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and having oil flows in the Middle East even more under the control of people that the U.S. can't control. If the U.S. does a deal with Iran, if Iran becomes once again part of a general arrangement in the Middle East that the U.S. presides over, then the possibility of the real desideratum of American policy, control of Middle East oil flows, becomes more likely. You're watching News from Neptune, yes. News from Neptune. And we want to comment on this, David?
Yeah, Carl, David, I have a difficult time distinguishing between neoliberals and neoconservatives when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah.
Now, domestically, it's more, it seems to me, of a tactical difference. They both want the same thing, which is the enrichment of the 1%,
right,
the ruling class at the expense of working people, basically to push us down to subsistence levels to where we'll be fighting for a $3 an hour job. It just seems like the neocons domestically just are very blatant about it, and the neoliberals, like Obama, pursue more of a subtle tactic, trying to claim all the time they're actually concerned about the well-being of the average American, when in fact they're doing everything they can to increase the power of the corporate sector. Case in point, this new Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement that Obama's pushing,
right,
which will be devastating to the American economy, more so even than what NAFTA was back in 1994, which over 5 million U.S. jobs, good-paying jobs, were lost. So, I mean, to me, it's more of a sort of a disagreement on tactics, and so this seems like more often than not, that it's a tactical disagreement between them, more of a sort of a inter-team rivalry, if you will.
I think that's right.
So that's just my take on it.
Well, I would say, in some sense, it's a question of how we want to use the terms neoliberal and neoconservative, and they have been used variously. They're not very, that's one of the reasons I wanted to spend a moment on talking about how we might use them in a way that seemed to me more consistent. basically, I would say that neoliberalism primarily refers to economic matters, and neoconservatism refers to war matters.
So it's two sides of the same coin.
They're two sides of the same coin, and that they are the same people, as you say. They're both in the interest of the American 1%, and the things are connected because American war policy abroad is involved with is designed for the profits of the American 1%, and American economic policy at home is based upon some major lobbies, like the defense lobby, the oil lobby, and things of this sort. So I think that if you look at the people who have been called neoliberals and neoconservatives in recent years, I think what you really see is a matter of emphasis. Neoliberalism having to do with American economic hegemony, and neoconservatism having to do with military hegemony.
I
Is that
think
fair?
The Democratic, the so-called difference between the Democratic and Republican Party, in a kind of crude way, but I think it maybe is a little bit helpful to think of the Democrats as the party of Wall Street and sort of the techno-industrial, sort of the Wall Street and Google and Facebook and so forth, whereas the Republicans are somewhat more the party of the military industrial complex, oil, and perhaps Walmart. I mean, Walmart kind of covers the whole thing, you know. Nobody can be opposed to Walmart, but still, there's in terms of interest, what are called interest groups, which is usually not a very good term to use to understand how these things really work. Whatever differences there are do have to do with this sort of jostling around among the 1% within the system that can't possibly change the way the system is actually structured.
One of the peculiarities in recent years is that the Republican Party, for all its moves substantially to the right, you know, in this last generation, contains a broader division than the Democratic Party on a lot of these issues. When you realize the Republican Party includes the Ron Paul wing, which was saying bring all the troops home, and the Tom Holland wing, as I suppose we have to call it now, the new Arkansas senator.
Tom
Cotton. Where did I get Holland?
Got it mixed up with the president of France.
Well, I don't know. That's Arkansas and France. Well, they look a lot alike, I guess. Tom Cotton is exactly who I meant, and Cotton, who is a madman and wants to invade Iran, and says we should do it right away and no messing around about legalities. That's great American talk, but I mean, after all, last American president from Arkansas did the same thing. But the divisions in the Republican Party are actually greater in some ways on these issues than the Democratic Party, although Rand Paul certainly seems to be doing his best to try to erase those divisions and move from his father's position to the Tom Cotton position.
Yeah,
You're quite right.
Right. So I mean, there's the aspect of genuine interest groups that may have relatively more sway one party or the other, and then there's the aspect of posturing in which they have to, in order to conduct elections every 4 years, they have to distinguish each other in just the context that you began the show with.
Exactly.
In terms of the limits of allowable debate. But I wanted to I think the topic that I wanted to bring today that I think really this sets the context for is that we have choices at many levels, and yesterday, or in this morning's newspaper, we're reading all the triumphalism about the new medical school that may be coming here, which weds the engineering expertise of the U of I campus with medicine. And really, how can we understand that in this context? I mean, this is a pretty small choice in terms of money involved. We're talking about $100 million or $300 million or whatever it is, but still, every choice that is made is a choice to forego other options. In economics, they call it opportunity costs. So what else could be being done with the $100, $200, $300, $500 million in our local economy that might look different than establishing a new medical school? Well, how is this all working? I've kind of put it into a little bit of a formula here. Carl Carl meaning Carl Clinic,
meaning
as
Carl.
opposed to
Right.
Carl Wealth. They're richer than Carl.
They are. They got some
Carl
of my
Wealth.
money.
Yeah, how are they funding this? How are they funding this new medical school? Carl Clinic plus donor wealth. They're expecting to get $100 million or up from donors, plus student debt. The students that will go into debt or just pay for the privilege to be a student here, plus the use of the UI infrastructure and kind of brand as well, plus the eroding local property tax base equals pharmaceutical profits. I forgot to put that equals, that's sort of how all this is being paid for, as well as by the pharmaceutical companies. But all that will redound to pharmaceutical profits, medical supply company profits, local developer profits, patent lawyer profits, UI administrator six-figure salaries, and the alleged legacy of Phyllis Wise and Robert Easter. And does any of this address the fact that we have a broken healthcare system that is much more expensive because it's privatized and that doesn't serve the people? No. Does any of this serve whatever the propaganda is about the local economy? Again, this is just choosing to spend money in, compared to what? Compared to providing decent jobs for more people, depending on spending, as opposed to spending money in a way that would offer more sort of egalitarian opportunities for those. This doesn't challenge any of that stuff. And when you really look at it, what it is that the public institution is being used as a cover for the private spending of money. And that's really what neoliberalism, that is essential to what neoliberalism is. They don't really have to take anything and privatize it as has often been done at the state level, but they can kind of make from the ground up this business into a kind of a private, a plaything of private interests, whether it be Carl Clinic, the pharmaceutical companies, and the kind of the grant writing professors who will participate in this by soliciting money from these private groups. And all of this is an alternative to doing the things that we really need to do in terms of what Carl mentioned, in terms of public policy that might provide full employment, that might lessen the inequality, the growing inequality, and then might provide for local, and might genuinely provide for local infrastructure in a way that we're being deprived of now.
I know you've got a take on this, David.
Oh, don't get me started on the U.S. privatized healthcare system. I'll focus more on this. So let me understand this correctly, David. So basically, this project's going to take public taxpayer dollars.
Well, actually, they would claim that it's not. Okay. They would claim that and as a positive, they claim that it's going to be funded privately by students, by Carl Clinic, by pharmaceutical companies, and by donors.
Okay, but then as you mentioned earlier, there's the increased amount of property taxes residents in the city of Urbana are having to pay because of Carl being able to hire a very clever attorney who ran for state rep last spring and got defeated handedly in the primary to basically cheat the city of Urbana out of needed tax revenue. Plus, they're using public property at the University of Illinois, and for what purpose? In order to for some private corporations to make more profits. I mean, there's something wrong with this, to me, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't say what the property. I mean, I know David Prohaska has written the articles. Carl, you have it up there on your website, I think, at the U of I, and shown how the expansion of Carl Clinic has eroded the property tax base, and there is speculation that that's what will continue to happen, whether it's in Urbana or Champaign or in Champaign County, however that plays out. But and I'm not even saying that. I mean, local government should be less dependent on property taxes anyway, or property taxes should probably be done differently in order to have wealthier people pay more. But still, this just, again, this privatized venture is seen as a positive. It's seen as, well, we're doing this without costing the taxpayers anything, as opposed to asking how can we use tax money in a fair sense to promote public policy that actually provides needed services and needed jobs.
These articles that David just referred to by David Prohaska in the local vanity publication, The Public Eye, which occasionally publishes interesting articles, can be found online. And David, another David, has done a lot of work on putting together this an account of this situation. We recommend that to you. You're listening to News from Neptune. We have a number of things on the agenda. We'll go perhaps to David Johnson.
Okay, today I'd like to talk about what's happened in the last week and a little bit in the previous week. Let's see, I'm going back 2 weeks ago, starting with, the Obama administration announced that its Justice Department would not pursue federal civil rights hate crime charges against George Zimmerman, the murderer of unarmed 17-year-old African-American youth Trayvon Martin. And then a week ago or so, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, they announced that they also were not going to be pursuing any civil rights hate crime charges against Darren Wilson, the one who killed unarmed African-American teenager Michael Brown. And after that announcement that Thursday, this last Saturday, Obama runs off to Selma, Alabama for a photo op, arm in arm with George W. Bush for the 50th anniversary of the basically beating of unarmed protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. The hypocrisy just has no ends, it seems. But then, right after that, on Monday, Obama announces this incredible statement that the country of Venezuela is a national security threat to the interests of the United States government. Wow. I mean, what a statement. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about today. It's amazing. I can't conceive of any threat to the security interests of the United States government from Venezuela. The only threat I see, of course, is from corporate special interests that are controlling our government. That's the threat here. Of course, as usual, they like to, I can't remember the term, but basically accuse the victim of actually being the perpetrator, which in essence, in this case, is the Obama administration. And it was interesting, there was a press conference after that statement that Obama made on Monday, I think it was on Tuesday, in which White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki stated that the statements by democratically elected President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela that the United States was involved in a destabilization campaign of Venezuela, she called those statements ludicrous. Now, what was interesting is you didn't see this on the corporate media, CNN, Fox, or ABC, NBC, or even PBS. But I did see a clip of that entire little press conference that Jen Psaki did, and it was really amazing, frankly, when you see the whole clip, because she was actually challenged on this statement by some members of the usually very well-heeled, polite corporate media correspondents there. Basically, there's one guy stating that, the United States hasn't tried to destabilize countries. She goes, well, not in the recent past. And he basically...
What time is it now?
He goes, well, it's definitely... And he said, of course, it definitely happened in your lifetime, and she's a fairly young woman. She goes, well, not in this period of the administration. And he says, come on, Jan. What about Honduras in 2009, when the United States supported the military overthrow of a democratically elected president, Manuel Zelaya? And what about the coup in Paraguay? It was a parliamentary coup of sorts by the democratically elected President Lugo that was immediately after this ousting of this democratically elected president. The Obama administration immediately came out with a statement supporting this. It was funny because she didn't know what to say. naturally. It would have been really interesting if that would have been shown on the corporate media. It would have taken a whole new perspective on this. But of course, that's not going to happen.
And he didn't even mention Ukraine.
Well, yeah, and let's talk about Ukraine. I mean, as Carl, as you mentioned earlier, all this has gone down the memory hole, I mean, for a lot of reasons, but primarily because there wasn't very good reporting on it when it was happening.
Right.
Is that this so-called Maiden Revolution was actually a destabilization campaign, basically organizing and financing the most extreme right-wing fascists, and I don't use that term lightly, outright fascist elements in Ukraine to basically violently overthrow a democratically elected government in Ukraine. And then this new government came into power, and they tried to impose governors on the eastern, all the provinces in Ukraine, including the eastern part, who didn't, they resented this. It'd be like if, the President of the United States would impose, appoint governors and mayors of Illinois and, say, Champaign-Urbana. I think there'd be a lot of people who are resentful of this. And, they don't want the eastern Ukraine as any part of this. But so my point is that
there's been a Nazi takeover in Washington before that happened.
Indeed.
And then they send you a Nazi governor, right?
Indeed. And I mean, there's plenty of proof. I mean, I could go into what happened in 2008, 2009 in Honduras, where the U.S. denied there was any involvement. And then, thank God, WikiLeaks came out and actually posted online all these State Department cables that they had obtained that showed they knew the U.S. State Department and the U.S. government knew exactly what was going on, and they were helping to make it happen. So, I mean, this woman, I mean, she's hoping that she thinks that the majority of the American people are uninformed, even don't care, and she may be right to a certain extent, but it was just really surprising that the corporate media press corps actually challenged her on this.
Well,
but what's going? Yes,
I think it was probably this guy Matt Lee
Yes.
from AP,
Yes.
who has also challenged her many times in relation to Israel-Palestine. He's just some kind of loose cannon, but
Thank
somehow
God for loose cannons.
got his credentials. AP is allowing him to be their stringer in the State Department press conferences, and he annoys her on a pretty regular basis to the point where they have this kind of routine they go through where he does these things, and he knows how to handle himself. I mean, he knows how to say things in a way that aren't that don't just get him kicked out of there. But yes, I mean, it's interesting to see what happens when somebody tries to raise the curtain on these obvious blatant lies. You're just supposed to believe that, yes, we are such a wonderful country, and we are the ones protecting freedom, and forget everything that's ever happened, and let's move forward.
Exactly. Not forward, not backwards.
Yes, I think you hit a real good point there, David. Is that whenever they try to spin their lies, of course they don't put any kind of context in it. I mean, and when I'm talking about it, it's like you expect that from whoever's in power in Washington D.C. But the corporate media, of course, they just repeat verbatim as stenographers and not journalists what the government officials said is the absolute truth for the most part. And when they tend to do documentaries or special reports, they usually take it totally out of historical and current context and not give you the necessary real picture, if you will. And so this is typical. But what's interesting is what's been going on in Venezuela for the last year or so is that there's plenty of proof that our government, of our tax money, has been trying to destabilize that country. The National Endowment for Democracy, the U.S. Agency for International Development, the International Republican Institute, the International Democratic Institute, all these non-governmental organizations have been operating in Venezuela for quite a while now. Over $100 million just last year was allocated for just the National Endowment for Democracy alone. And what they do, of course, they operate out of the U.S. Embassy, and they go and try to find the most extreme people, basically recruiting among former elites in Venezuela who no longer are in power, that are upset because their wealth and privilege has been curtailed a little bit, and they recruit in the private universities where the sons and daughters of these elites attend college, and also, outright hiring street thugs. And this, all these demonstrations going on. Yes, and they're trying to say that Venezuela's committed horrible human rights violations when I'd like to see what the U.S. government government would do if there was if there were violent demonstrations on the scale that's been happening in Venezuela. I mean, considering the unarmed murders of Michael Brown and all these other people around the country by the police, where nothing's being done about it. Not to mention, you know, yes, we do have political prisoners in this country, and there's quite a few. I could go on a long list, but maybe another program. So, I mean, for the our current government to try to lecture another country about human rights, I mean, they've not got a leg to stand on. I mean, let's talk about Mexico, what's happening there currently. Let's talk about Honduras, another failed state. Let's talk about Libya. Oh, yes, Libya. Another intervention by the United States. You know, yes, Omar Gaddafi was a little odd. He wasn't the nicest guy in the world, but you know what? The Libyan people had one of the highest standard of livings in the Arab world. Free health care, free college, and there was some stability there. You didn't have roving gangs going around raping and murdering people. Well, that's the case, as is the case now. And you think, why would the United States government pursue this as a foreign policy objective? Well, it's all a part of the game. I think the writer Naomi Klein described it right in her book, Shock Doctrine. In order to control a country or a region, one thing you have to do is go in and have just a total shock to the systems, a shock to the economic, the political, the societal cohesion, if you will, to make it total chaos to where people are just so distraught that they're going to be willing to let anybody come in and restore order. Of course, on the people who's coming in to restore order, it's going to be on their terms. And this is what the tactics are used. And these are old tactics. I mean, what they're doing in Venezuela now, they did in Chile in 1973 with the democratically elected President Salvador Allende. There's a pattern here. These people are criminals, and they, just like a normal, a professional criminal, they have what's called an MO. Let's see. Yeah, Carl, you could tell me what the Latin word for MO.
Modus operandi.
Modus
a way of
operandi,
working.
yes.
They have a way of working.
Yes, and it's
exactly.
all documented. It's not conspiracy theory. Go do some research. This is so well documented. I mean, it's almost to the point, if you've been following this, it's like the same old recycled playbook, if you will.
Actually, as you describe what's going on in Venezuela right now, David, I was powerfully reminded of the description in Tim Weiner's book about the CIA called Legacy of Ashes, but what the CIA did in its paradigm example of overthrowing a democratic government. That was Iran in 1953.
Yes.
And I would recommend that anyone who wants to look at the comparison read about what the U.S. is doing in Venezuela right now, and you won't find that in the American media. You have to go to foreign media, like Telesur, for example, and read about what the U.S. is doing in Venezuela. But compare it with the historical account of more than 50 years ago of what the U.S. did to overthrow a democratic government in Iran and establish a dictatorship that would follow Washington's bidding on the control of energy resources in the region. This is the paradigm example for the U.S. of how to bring countries into the collusion that the U.S. needs in order to control these energy flows. And Venezuela is precise, which probably has the largest oil deposits in the Western Hemisphere, well, largest after the U.S. and Canada. The Venezuela is in very much the same position as Iran was in 1953.
You know, the problem with my two colleagues to my right here is they don't read the Sunday News Gazette. They don't read Bruce Kaufman's history lessons in the Sunday News Gazette.
Yes,
and if you had just read those, see, you would be straightened out, because a couple of weeks ago, maybe this past Sunday or the Sunday before last, he informed us that following World War II, our greatest president, Harry Truman, stabilized the world by providing funds to the Greek, basically fascists after World War II, to make sure the communists take over there, and that he did a wonderful thing in doing so, and set everything up, set the Cold War up properly, got it started properly, and that we owe him a debt of gratitude for doing that. And I think another letter writer, or maybe it was a commenter on the News Gazette website, I forget, went on and on. There was our local hotel consultant, Peter Tamaris, informed us about the virtues of statesmanship and Henry Kissinger and so forth. So really, if you guys just read the Sunday commentaries section, we wouldn't have to come in here every week
Well, exactly right.
and have to, and have to straighten everything out. We could just go on with the usual lies that just in such a bald-faced way. There was a debate, a recent debate that's on YouTube between the former ambassador Dennis Ross and a very credible fellow named Bassem Haddad that took place at Cornell. And again, this was one of those examples where somebody from within the establishment just gets exposed with the truth. It's so obvious that Dennis Ross is being made a fool of, and of course it was, decorum was maintained and there wasn't any insults going on. But if you just contrast the view of the world to what the one Bassem Haddad was using, facts, analysis, Dennis Ross was just using cliches. He began his talk by quoting Condoleezza Rice, by saying that apparently Condoleezza Rice says that, well, in the Middle East, we've chosen stability over democracy, and we've gotten neither of them. That's the party line when it comes to the Middle East.
Germany could have said that about Poland in 1939, after 1939, right? Yeah. Stability rather than democracy.
Yeah.
You are watching News from Neptune. I want to say a word about Ukraine, and we have some other topics we want to turn to. The U.S. government, both the Obama administration and the Congress, are urging an illegal junta in Kiev, Ukraine, Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, an illegal government that the U.S. installed. The U.S. State Department put this government in there. They're urging that government to attack the eastern part of the country again. There's a ceasefire agreement that was arranged in Minsk a month or two ago that is in fact being observed by both sides right now. But the government, the U.S., the administration, and the Congress are both urging the illegal junta in Kiev to put an end to this ceasefire and to attack again the eastern part of the country. And it's rumored that that is actually being prepared right now. The reason that it has to be prepared is that the Kiev junta its military forces were beaten badly by the so-called separatists in the Donbass region, in the eastern region of Ukraine, and the government in Kiev is having trouble recruiting Ukrainians to fight in their army against these rebel provinces. So it's there's a hiatus in the fighting right now, but probably not a promise of any long-term solution. More than 6,000 people have already been killed in eastern Ukraine by the attack of the junta, and the Obama administration is surreptitiously sending weapons and personnel into Kiev with plans to renew the war, apparently, next month. There are reports in the foreign press of an offensive being planned for mid-April. Ukraine is a rich agricultural, mining, and industrial region in Eastern Europe, and it was part of the Soviet Union until the USSR broke up in 1991. Since then, the U.S. has been trying to reduce Russia and the other countries that made up the USSR to the economic status of third world countries, mainly suppliers of raw materials for a U.S.-led world economy. The result in the 90s was a depression in Russia that was worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s. The U.S. Essentially manipulated Russia through a drunken president, Boris Yeltsin, and the life expectancy of Russians actually declined in this crash of Russian society that followed the breakup of the Soviet Union, and this was policy of the American government precisely to do that. When Vladimir Putin became president in 1999, president of Russia in 1999, he reversed that precipitous decline. And that's why he's the world's most popular leader of a major country, or certainly Europe's most popular leader in a major country, and why he's demonized in the West, not because he's invading Ukraine. He isn't invading Ukraine, although that's all we hear in the American media, Russian aggression, Russian aggression, Russian aggression, as our colleague Ron Zook says. But why is President Obama adding yet another war to the mass murder he's committed or supported illegally in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, and even the Philippines? It's a proxy war meant to injure seriously the Russian economy and at best force regime change in that country so that Russia cannot contribute to an organized Eurasian economy in concert with China that will reduce the worldwide economic control of the rich American 1%. The leading Democratic Party strategist, Zbigniew Brzezinski, advisor to presidents from Jimmy Carter to Barack Obama, wrote almost 20 years ago, and I'm quoting, "It is imperative that no Eurasian challenger emerges capable of dominating Eurasia and thus of also challenging America. How America manages Eurasia is critical. About 75% of the world's people live in Eurasia." Eurasia is the conjunction of the Europe and Asian continents, essentially the area presided over by Russia and China. How America manages Eurasia is critical, wrote Brzezinski. About 75% of the world's people live in Eurasia, and most of the world's physical wealth is there as well, both in its enterprises and underneath its soil. Eurasia accounts for about 3/4 of the world's known energy resources. America is now the only global superpower, and Eurasia is the globe's central arena. Hence, what happens to the distribution of power on the Eurasian continent will be of decisive importance to America's global primacy and to America's historical legacy. Close quote. That's Brzezinski writing 20 years ago and describes the policy followed by subsequent American administrations, both Republican and Democrat, up to and including the Obama administration's deceitful overthrow of an elected government in Ukraine. In this indirect attack via Ukraine that risks war with nuclear-armed Russia, the Obama administration is working for that 1%, not the majority of Americans, as Brzezinski readily admits. He writes that if America is to control Eurasia and dominate the world, it cannot sustain a popular democracy because, quote, "the pursuit of power is not a goal that commands popular passion. Democracy is inimical to imperial mobilization." Close quote. I mean, what could be clearer? That is, if Obama told the truth about what the government is actually doing, what his government is actually doing in Ukraine, people would reject it, as they would. But imperial mobilization, military control in Europe and Asia, is the vision that drives Obama and company, and therefore they try to mislead the U.S. populace on what they're doing. Most Americans don't know that U.S. special forces, death squads, like American Sniper, are active in 3/4 of the countries of the world. Their activities include kidnapping, we call it rendition, torture, and murder, all under the excuse of fighting terrorism, but in fact part of Brzezinski's imperial mobilization. Americans don't know, but the rest of the world does, and we're hated around the world for it. Now, that's the background that you're not hearing from the U.S. corporate media about what's going on in Ukraine and about the supposed hesitations of the Obama administration to send weapons to Ukraine. They're not hesitating at all. They're following out the same policy they've been following out for a generation and more, and it's extremely dangerous, extremely illegal, and not at all in the interest of Americans or Russians, only in the interest of the American 1%. If we had a candid media in this country, you would know these things, you would hear about these things, but I'm afraid not. Comments, gentlemen?
Well, I was just going to mention that as long as you're mentioning euphemisms like rendition, Obama also has a euphemism even for murder. It's called being taken out.
Oh, yes, that's his favorite from early on.
Yes, and that's one I particularly find rankling.
Yeah, it's funny. He used that when he was a candidate even, and I remember writing about it, remarking on the time, this peculiar hesitation to say what he meant. I mean,
Yeah,
the use of the euphemism it comes up in other ways. The book on Double Down about the 2012 campaign quotes Obama as saying, apparently ruefully, "I've become very good at killing people. I didn't realize that was going to be a long suit of mine." Now, the reporters who wrote that book said that, I mean, they quote that, and the quote, in fact, has never been denied, as far as I know, by the Obama administration. But, I mean, it suggests that at the personal level, our colleague Ron Zook tells us we should never reflect on the personal activities of these political figures. But still, it's not hard not to see Obama having something of a bad conscience about the mass murder that he's responsible for.
The question I would ask either of you would be, I mean, how is the liberal media, how is the quote-unquote liberal media handle this? Even Amy Goodman, even with Barack Obama going to Selma this past weekend, which you mentioned, David, how is it, do they still have this tendency to sort of compartmentalize Obama? And it's like a good Obama, a bad Obama, or we cut him a break when he goes to Selma, or we cut him a break when he says something about gay marriage or whatever. I mean, how does that work in the way the media, even the liberal to left media, works right now?
Well, I think he's fortunate in his enemies. When he's being attacked by people like Tom Cotton, then people say, well, wait a minute, this man Cotton is a crazy man.
Yeah.
Therefore, Obama must be doing something right. Now that doesn't follow, but still, I think that's part of the answer. Yeah. I mean, it's the way anti-Semitism justifies Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah.
I mean, he needs the anti-Semites more than anybody else.
Yeah.
Obama needs the Tom Cotton opponents more than anybody else.
Yeah.
David, that was a very excellent analysis of democracy now and some of the other liberal media. If you want to find out what's going on, you have to go on the internet and you have to find good sources. I mean, you can't just go to the internet and go to CNN.com. I mean, you've got to actually do some, it takes time to find reliable sources. Counterpunch is good. And if you want to watch television, the Real News Network is good. Also RT Television, which of course, yes, it's television that's run by the Russian government. But the thing is that there is some very good news programs on there with, American real journalists. And I think the Russians realize, hey, if we just let some of these American, independent journalists that can't get a job in the American corporate media, just bring them on the show and let them speak the truth and let them do their real journalism, we've scored some great points here. I mean, yes, of course they're doing it for propaganda purposes, but what these programs like Abby Martin's Breaking the Set and others that are on RT television, I mean, they've got some excellent, well-documented reporting about what's going on in the United States and other parts of the world. Now, of course, you got to take definitely a large dose of salt when there's any reporting on Russia, but you got to consider the source. And this is part of the thing that it takes some effort to do this because let's face it, we're in a country that supposedly has the freest media in the world. Well, that's an absolute lie. It's probably one of the as far as viewers of the U.S. corporate media, the people in the United States are the least informed of anybody in the world. It's the slickest media anywhere in the world, but you'll be the least informed just consuming it all the time. And I always like to call the U.S. corporate media in this country the Iron Curtain of the corporate media, because like the old euphemism of the Iron Curtain during the Cold War, in which nothing could come in and go out to speak of in the Soviet Union and those controlled countries. Likewise here, you go abroad and you talk to the average person in other countries, I don't care if it's Europe, Latin America, or wherever, they know a lot about what's going on in the world and even what's going on in the United States. But you ask the average American what's going on even in Mexico, they don't have a clue. And it's not their fault. It's just that they're intentionally misinformed and, oh, by the way, distracted. What's Britney Spears doing lately? What about Kim Kardashian? I mean, this is all part of the propaganda, distraction and misinformation, disinformation.
I've got another example.
But even the Hillary Clinton email thing is a form of distraction.
Yes, indeed.
Black Agenda Report is an excellent site on the web, and also it turns up as radio commentaries and so forth. They're the only ones I know that have raised some serious questions about the reporting of Obama's going to Selma, where Democracy Now! And everybody else says, of course, here's a wonderful example of the progress that's been made in 50 years. Black Agenda Report points out that, in fact, if you look at the area around Selma, you find intense poverty, and most of the poor people are black. They point out that it was no accident that Martin Luther King went from being a civil rights leader to being a leader in a poor people's movement, and that this is exactly what's been destroyed or been far from successful in the 50 years since Selma. Whatever civil rights progress you might point to, and there were some fraternity boys in Oklahoma who suggested that wasn't too great either, the crucial issues, how people actually live, those haven't been dealt with. And in fact, in some ways, it's almost the case that civil rights has been an excuse not to deal with the real issues of class, poverty, and immiseration that the American economy continues to produce in the very region where this civil rights triumph was supposed to take place. The only one I know who even pointed to that contrast was a Black Agenda Report.
Yeah, and let me say, just as a footnote to this, that the main perpetrators of Black Agenda Report, Glenn Ford and Bruce Dixon, are also often featured on The Real News. And another person featured on The Real News that I would like to mention in relation to Israel-Palestine is an Israeli commentator, a young man named Shir Hever, H-E-V-E-R, who's actually living in Germany right now, but is doing excellent, just has excellent commentary, for example, on the upcoming election in Israel. And just a few views of his 7, 8, 10-minute interviews or commentaries on the Real News Network really, I think, provide some excellent insight from the kind of broad perspective which I'll say, immodestly, we like to give here on this program also.
Black Agenda Report also has a connection with the Green Party, and we have a Green Party event coming up in Champaign-Urbana. Want to say something about that, David?
Sure. If you'd like to come out tomorrow, Saturday, at 1 p.m. at the Champaign Library, Room C, there's going to be a press conference for Rich Whitney, a past Green Party gubernatorial candidate in Illinois, who actually obtained over 12% of the vote. And he's going to be doing a press conference about how to solve the Illinois budget. Well, actually, it's a revenue crisis, not a real budget crisis, but he's going to be giving a commentary on that. So if you'd like, come out for that. It's tomorrow at 1 p.m. at the Champaign Library, Room C.
You've been watching News from Neptune for the 11th week of 2015, a passive and obedient edition. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight have been David Green and David Johnson. Our thanks to our director and producer, Jason Liggett, and to Jacob tonight. Upcoming programs here on UPTV include Labor's Worldview, Sunday at 4 p.m. with David Johnson, and more news from outside the bubble, as Harry Shearer says, that you can't hear elsewhere in CU. Note particularly the early morning programs here on UPTV recently. There's a new column at Smile Politely under the name News from Neptune. The headline this week is CU attacks Russia, thousands die. The headline is true. Local politician academics parrot the U.S. propaganda lies about Russian aggression, and the U.S. encouraged the government in Kiev to kill thousands of people in eastern Ukraine. Inshallah, we'll be back next week for a new edition of News from Neptune. Remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, what's past is prologue, what to come in yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.